It's currently day 58 with still no arrest or named suspect. Online investigator Chris McDonough has been building a documented argument for weeks, and the people with the authority to answer it have stayed silent. McDonough says what happened here matters because every seasoned investigator will tell you the same thing. First contact with a crime scene is everything. Get it right and you build a case. Miss it, even once, and you fall behind. From where this investigation stands, that is exactly what he argues happened in the Nancy Guthrie case. Every piece of evidence was handled by the family first. Now everyone wants answers why. 58 days is not simply a number. In kidnapping investigations, the FBI's own operational frameworks acknowledge that the window for recovering a living victim narrows with each passing hour, and that after the first 72 hours, the nature of the investigation fundamentally shifts from a rescue operation into something more uncertain. 2 months in, what was once urgent has become a quiet, grinding chase through digital records, DNA databases, and surveillance footage from cameras that may or may not have captured the right car on the right night. 2 months in, law enforcement goes silent for long stretches, and that silence carries its own weight. Sometimes the silence means investigators are closing in, following a thread so sensitive they cannot afford to disturb it. Sometimes it means the leads have dried up, and the case has quietly become what nobody wants to call it: cold. And sometimes, and this is the version that online investigators are raising right now, backed not by rumor, but by a documented, peer-reviewed framework, it means the investigation has been running on a track that was laid down in the very first hours of the case, and nobody has gone back to question the track itself. That is the argument online investigator Chris McDonough, who posts under the account at True Crime BR, has been building in a detailed breakdown of this case. His credentials as a professional investigator are not publicly verified. He operates as an online analyst, but the substance of what he is describing matters because the pattern is real. It is documented in the case record, and it has now been independently validated by someone with far more authority than a social media account. Before we get to that, let's establish something clearly. This is not a video about family guilt. On February 16th, 2026, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos issued an official public statement clearing the entire Guthrie family, all siblings and their spouses, as possible suspects. His words were unambiguous. The family has been nothing but cooperative and gracious and are victims in this case. To suggest otherwise is not only wrong, it is cruel. He also confirmed to KOLD that DNA recovered from inside Nancy's home does not match her or, in his phrasing, anyone in close contact to her. The family is not guilty. That is settled. What is not settled, what has not been addressed publicly in 58 days, is the question of process. And process, in a case that still has no arrest, is the only question that matters. Let's go back to the evening of January 31st, 2026. Nancy Guthrie left her home in the Catalina foothills just north of Tucson at 5:32 in the afternoon. She took an Uber to her daughter Annie's house for dinner. Games, family, an ordinary Saturday evening. The Uber driver who made that trip was subsequently interviewed by investigators, confirmed publicly by Sheriff Nanos, though no details of that interview have ever been released to the public. Nancy spent the evening with her family, which included Annie and Annie's husband Tommaso Cioni, and was driven home by family members at approximately 9:45 to 9:48 that evening. The official sheriff's timeline, confirmed across multiple outlets, puts her return at 9:48 p.m., the garage. Door opened. 2 minutes later, it closed. Nobody outside that house would know anything had gone wrong for nearly 14 hours. At 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, the Ring doorbell camera at the property disconnected. Not because it malfunctioned, because someone was already at the door. At 2:12 a.m., a separate security camera at the property detected motion. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker, a device that transmits cardiac data to an application on her cell phone, dropped its connection entirely. That pacemaker signal is the closest thing investigators have to a confirmed independent abduction timestamp. An 84-year-old woman with serious mobility limitations who required daily heart medication and whose back pain was so severe that on a good day, she could walk was in the house. Her medication was on the counter. At 11:56 the following morning, a friend of Nancy's noticed and Cameron Guthrie went to their mother's home. They were on the property, searching it for approximately an hour. 12:15. 12 minutes after the call, somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour after the family had first walked criminal investigation, the integrity of a crime scene is not a technicality. It is the foundation. Investigators are every displaced object, every surface, every open door and smeared window could be critical, and they are trained to recovered and cannot be undone. It does not matter who those people are. It does not matter how certain investigators are. You don't. In this case, law enforcement did not have first contact with this crime scene. The family did. When Annie this was not a medical emergency. The back doors of Nancy's home were propped open. There was blood on the front door. Publicly for the first time in her March 26, 2026 interview with today's Hoda Kotb. Confusion. They thought Nancy might have had a medical episode in the night, that paramedics had come and taken her out. Saw the blood, and then they understood. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, analyzing those propped back doors, operational purposes, either for their own exit route or to allow additional individuals to access the property.
Nancy knew of javelinas and wildlife. That's why she had her Nest camera. But could the bad guys have propped that out?
Or signals multiple perpetrators rather than a single actor working alone. These expert analyses are built in only account of what those doors looked like that morning. The family described them to law enforcement when deputies arrived. Crime scene in those first critical hours came filtered through the account of the people who arrived first. The door walked in at 12:15 p.m. were walking into a scene that had already been processed psychologically and physically. Significant. In the hours after Nancy was reported missing, while investigators were still processing the scene, March 26th, Today interview. In her exact words, Cameron believed right away, even on the phone when I called.
When I called him, he knew.
He knew.
And he said, I think she's been kidnapped.
Before Nanos held a single press conference, the family had already framed this as a ransom kidnapping, and was reported missing on February 3rd. The first ransom note arrived. KOL-DTV in Tucson received it through their tips. Different IP address, but using similar anonymizing software. Both notes carry details about the interior of Nancy about a floodlight inside the house. FBI Special Agent in charge, Heath Janke, confirmed the Bureau was taking at least received a copy of the first note, described its level of specificity as striking. The grammar is perfect. It is referenced where the watch was located, not in a place you would necessarily immediately think. Here is what law actual captor or from someone with insider knowledge of the home who was not directly involved in the abduction. Would have known. That is a list of people that investigators have never publicly described. On February 7th, we received your message and we understand, Savannah said. We beg you now to return our mother to us. This is...
We beg you now to return our mother to us so that we can celebrate with her. This is the only way we will have peace.
Validated the ransom framing before law enforcement had formally confirmed it. The family's public acceptance of the note established kidnapping for ransom as the dominant frame through which this case was understood publicly and arguably two of the ransom notes the family received are legitimate, and that the others were likely from opportunists. No confirmed which notes, if any, came from someone actually holding Nancy Guthrie, and yet the ransom framework introduced by Savannah in her first major interview has remained the investigative and public center of gravity for this case. Time passes. There's too much involved, he said. There are too many ways people can get caught. Multiple former panel, no proof of life, notes sent to media outlets rather than to the family directly, as highly unusual for a genuine ambiguity in this case is not a feature of how ransom kidnappings work. It is an anomaly, and yet the ransom framework you've been hearing today is the EIE kind of thing that keeps you engaged with this case. Stay with us through this video. But by someone who ran the Pima County Sheriff's Department. And what he said about this investigation changes the formally did with the family in the first days of this case because that record is important. On February 16th, included in terms of the family's cooperation. In an interview with KOLD, he said, "We talked to them, we took homes." He added they were 100% cooperative and that they had been cleared in the first few days. On publicly, described by the Sheriff's Department as part of the normal course of the case, FBI agents canvassed the footage was released. An unrelated man was briefly detained and his home searched in Rio Rico, Arizona. He was his standard investigative procedure. Start at the center and work outward. Phones, computers, vehicles, homes. Investigation. That is not evidence of suspicion. It is the protocol. But the cumulative picture that emerges from family's voluntary cooperation. They provided the devices. They opened the homes. They described the crime scene. And as investigators moved outward into the neighborhood, canvassing for leads, the family's own public statement on observations or conversations that, in retrospect, may hold significance. That statement aligns directly with what whoever did this is from the Tucson area, possibly from the neighborhood itself. How much of that alignment is the into the investigation's operating theory? That is the question that has not been answered publicly, but it is no hours. On March 27, 2026, some days ago, Dr. Richard Carmona appeared on the News Nation program Brian Enton General of the United States. He spent 3 decades with the Pima County Sheriff's Department, including years jurisdiction. And what he said on that broadcast is as direct a rebuke of the current investigation's integrity as he said perplexed all of us was the moment Sheriff Nanos publicly announced on television that he personally had It's the lead detective that's out there that says we can open this area now because we have made this The reopening of an active crime scene on television is not standard practice. It is a breach of the procedural and closed the scene again for further investigation, a reversal that Carmona said was essentially meaningless. He also addressed footage that had circulated showing a Domino's delivery car driving across Nancy Guthrie's front. Attorney says that crime scene was corrupted. You had people delivering pizzas. How do we know this is real?
You have not maintained the integrity of that space that the detective said are absolutely necessary to discover any evidence that may be germane to this case. But again, this is coming from the senior. Some of the things that he said.
He then went beyond the crime scene itself to raise concerns about public trust and the public loses faith in you. You cannot lead without trust. He also raised a separate issue. Nanos citing cost savings. Carmona pointed out that federal forensic services are provided to local agencies at no charge. Already supporting that. That decision to bypass the FBI lab in favor of a private facility in a case where the FBI attorneys exploit to challenge evidence chains in court, whether that was a consequential decision or an undermines the public's trust in the investigation. Those criticisms did not come in isolation. Carmona's remarks the Pima County Deputies Organization, which represents more than 300 members of the Sheriff's Department, voted outside critics. That is his own department. Separately, reporting by the Arizona Republic revealed that Nanos had determination over disciplinary issues, including excessive force, insubordination, and off-duty gambling. Board of Supervisors voted unanimously to compel Nanos to answer questions under oath, citing a territorial error. Newsweek that Nanos had betrayed the trust that our community placed in him. Nanos, for his part, has rejected the scene go too soon or any of that. That's just silly. Whether you find that reassuring or sheriff who is simultaneously facing a no-confidence vote from his own deputies, a board-compelled deposition, investigative environment. That is an investigation conducting itself under conditions of institutional actually shows what exists in this case that did not come from the family's account. The FBI, working with Google, device was yanked from the wall, but the data it had captured was stored in the cloud, accessible through Google's camera lens with his gloved hand, then gathers shrubbery and props it in front of the lens to obstruct the view more sold exclusively at Walmart, though Nanos later acknowledged in a March 2nd interview with NBC that the backpack may we're looking at. He is wearing gloves, a ski mask, and carrying a firearm in an unusual center waist holster position. Approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, average build. There is a second image among those released by the FBI, one in day, suggesting the suspect visited Nancy's front door more than once before the night of her disappearance. A full backpack armed entry, prior surveillance visits strongly indicated advanced reconnaissance. Confirmed to CNN that they believe the suspect may have conducted surveillance on the property as far back as January 31st and the early morning hours of February 1st. Additional surveillance cameras on Nancy's property, one focused on the enforcement. Those cameras, according to CBS News reporting, captured weeks of footage before the kidnapping. Family captured on the doorbell camera. Investigators are operating in an environment where they have extensive evidence is where things stand in an interesting place right now. Earlier in the investigation, a black glove consistent with the gloves worn by the suspect on the doorbell footage, and it contained DNA from an unknown male. That offenders and returned no match. Investigators then began the process of genetic genealogy analysis, the same recent confirmed reporting. The Pima County Sheriff's Department disclosed that the glove DNA had been traced, not closed. What remains open is the DNA recovered from inside Nancy's home, the mixed profile that does not match Nancy. Several individuals, which makes extracting a clean, usable profile for a single person significantly more difficult. Nanos called it a viable lead that will take more time. That is where it stands. Nancy's pacemaker disconnected at 2:28 a.m. Forensically clean data point in the case. It tells investigators when she was likely moved, and it anchors the home at 2:36 a.m. on the same morning. Investigators have not been able to identify that vehicle. Nanos told NBC in March. This is the full picture of what 58 days of investigation has produced. A real that closed without resolution, a pacemaker timestamp, an unidentified vehicle, and a sheriff facing his former colleague just called corrupted. This is where Chris McDonough's framework stops being an online theory detailed posts is that law enforcement has been experiencing what he calls cognitive dissonance in this frame of an investigation becomes self-reinforcing, making it progressively harder for investigators the family's talk track instead of following evidence, his phrase, and that the entire structural position of the family investigation in ways that have not been independently examined. His credentials are unverified. He is an online analyst. Understanding precisely because it clarifies what this argument is actually about. In 2006, law professors Keith cited documents in American criminal justice reform, the multiple dimensions of tunnel vision in criminal Department of Justice and criminal justice reform bodies across multiple countries. Their central finding was not tendency present in all human beings, including experienced forensic professionals, that becomes acutely made. Findley and Scott define it as the result of several cognitive mechanisms working simultaneously: confirmation bias, which makes past decisions appear more obviously correct than they were, and outcome bias, which causes people to Together, these mechanisms lead investigators to build a model of what happened and then selectively filter all present. The research confirmed this applies not only to detectives and prosecutors, but to professional physical evidence, changed their interpretations of that evidence in ways consistent with the framing they had received. Innocence Project, analyzing the 170-plus post-conviction DNA exonerations recorded at the time, found tunnel as the environment in which individual failures, evidence misinterpretation, overlooked leads, unchallenged mention that Findley and Scott flagged for high-profile cases. When an investigation operates under intense dominant narrative increases dramatically. The family of the victim has credibility. They are visibly simply an analytical act. It is in the environment of a nationally covered case involving one of the most